Thank you so much. I needed that. Public speaking is not my love language, so yeah, we're going to do the best that we can. My name is Jen Seams, and Immortal Perfumes is my company. And I thought that tonight I would kind of give you the Immortal Perfumes origin story and kind of talk to you about some of my favorite sex stories throughout history. Kind of a big deal on TikTok, not really. And I have been making videos about perfume history, and it was like this weird thing that I was just like, oh, I just feel like doing this, it's fine. And then a lot of people like them, so here we are, randomly an amateur historian. But when it comes to Immortal Perfume, so I have always been into perfume. When I was a child, I would sneak into my mom's room and just like douse myself in her bottle of poison. And like I say that and it's like she knew what I was doing. Like there was no sneaking poison. Like that was a very loud perfume. And then when I was a little bit older, maybe like 11 or 12, my uncle got me a bottle of CK1, which you could actually smell up in the gallery. And again, like saying that out loud, like I feel like there was maybe a hidden message in that he was like buying me this perfume. But I thought I was just so cool, like 11 years old, here's my perfume. But then when it comes to Immortal Perfumes, so it all started in the magical year of our Lord, 2011, and two things happened. One, I got engaged, and two, Pinterest became a thing, and I got an account, and my friends and I were just like furiously like doing wedding planning and like painting all this like random stuff, and I found a tutorial on how to make solid perfume. And I was like, well, I've always loved perfume, so I'm gonna try to make this. At the time, I was a teacher, and if any of you are teachers, so how it works is they say, last one hired, first one fired. So if you don't have tenure, you basically get laid off. I got laid off. Also, teaching was terrible because it was just very stressful. So I was like really trying to think about what is something that I like to do that I could, be good at. And I read some books by Mandy Attel. I found this Pinterest tutorial, and I made a god-awful, like it was really bad, like rosy mess of a perfume for my friend Katie, who is maybe watching right now on TikTok Live. Hi Katie, if you're there. It was really bad. And then what happened was, engaged, we got married, and my idea of a good time is like going to historical sites. So we went to London and Paris, and I was like, well, absolutely, we're gonna go visit King Henry and Marie Antoinette. That's just what we're doing. And Marie Antoinette, this is kind of a gross anecdote. Marie Antoinette liked to cosplay as a peasant, and she had this whole village that was just made for her to wear peasant dresses and just like get away from the stress of court. It was called her Hambo. And my poor husband, that I dragged him to Marie Antoinette's Hambo, there was a sign, and it talked about what notes were in Marie Antoinette's perfume. And so I don't know how old I was, like maybe 26 or 27. And I think I just had more confidence than I do now, because I was like, well, I'm just gonna make that, because obviously I read 3 books, I took a Pinterest tutorial, I'm gonna make it. And that is how Immortal Perfumes started. So all of my perfumes are based on historical and literary figures. And I was an English major, in case you couldn't tell. And then how we are kind of like where we are today. So in 2021, I was finishing treatment for cancer, totally fine now, everything's good. But at the time I was in radiation, and all of a sudden, my phone is like blowing up, and I was like, what is going on here? You have probably seen this person's videos on TikTok or Instagram, but Professor Perfume, her name is Amelia, she's wonderful. She did a video about my perfume, Pemberley, and that year, my business exploded by 700%. And that, just one video, basically sustained me for a year. And I was just busy that entire year, and it was incredible. Like, I've been doing this since 2011 and never seen movement like that. So Amelia, if you're watching, thank you. And from there, I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta get on TikTok and like do all this stuff. But when I first started, I was just kind of like, well, everybody is doing these, like, this is how you make this is a day in the life. And so I was trying to do that. wasn't getting any traction. But then when I decided to just like be my weird self, I saw an article about the perfume that the Queen wore, and it was her Jubilee before she died. And so I put this video up, and it got like 3,000 views, which to me at the time I was like, that is so many, I'm viral, this is wonderful. But then the next day I did a video on Princess Diana, and it got 100,000 views. So that was a little bit of a different situation. But that is kind of like how we got to where we are. And so now I thought that for this event, I would just share with you some of my favorite scent stories. So we're gonna actually go all the way back to ancient Egypt for this first one. And I will preface this by saying that the first like 3 stories that I have for you are all from a series that I did called Perfume and Poison. And you would not believe the overlap between perfume and poison throughout history. Like, there are ladies just murdering their husbands left and right. And as they should, thank you. We will get, just you wait. All right, so let's start with Cleopatra. So everybody thinks like Cleopatra died by poison by snake. No, she did die by poison, but it was probably from a needle or a pinprick, something like that. And there was a lot of Roman propaganda about how terrible she was and how she was a seductress and all this other BS, frankly. And then you've also got Shakespeare, our old friend that likes to give us so many historical inaccuracies that we just still are not getting over. And he actually wrote this passage that I will read to you. This was the arrival of Cleopatra to Antony and Julius Caesar. So he wrote, "Purple the sails and so perfumed, the winds were lovesick with them." So he was basically saying she put perfume on her sails so that she would be announced by her perfume before she got there. Right? Like, would you call that like soulage? Like, but anyway, in 2012, archaeologists actually discovered a perfume making facility. And they found these kilns, and they had the residue of ancient perfume in them. And what they found was that it had a similar consistency to olive oil. And this perfume was called the Medici perfume, and archaeologists call it the Chanel No. 5 of the ancient world. And we don't know for sure if Cleopatra wore that. Everybody is saying she did because it was the ancient one from that time. But it is likely if it was coming from this big factory and you had to be a wealthy person like that, she probably wore it. So very cool. It also contained myrrh, cardamom, cinnamon, olive oil, and other ingredients. But again, we've never actually found Cleopatra's tomb, so we don't know. But, okay, next story is for you. I would like to dedicate this story to Bree. The story of Aqua Tofana, which was also known as murder in a bottle or inheritance powder. Love it. Absolutely love the creativity there. So this story is about Lady Vengeance. Her name was Julia Tofana, and her mother, it is believed, was the one that created Aqua Tofana, which was basically a powder that you couldn't taste it, you couldn't smell it. It reminds me of the Princess Bride, what is it, iocane powder or whatever? It's like iocane powder. And basically, Julia's mother murdered her father, and then it's presumed that she used the Aqua Tofana, and she taught her daughter the recipe for this before she was eventually killed for murdering her husband. So Julia, this is 17th century Italy, so at the time women didn't really have options. You're either getting married to somebody that your dad married you off to, or you're a sex worker. Like, those are basically your options. And there was an underground cabal, and this is another interesting thing that you see throughout history. There's these underground networks that target noble ladies, and they're witches, astrologers, and abortionists. And the reason why they target these women was because they were wealthy, and it was a way that they could control them. So Julia was making her Aqua Tofana, and this is like, at this point it's a legend, but they say that she murdered 650 men. And here's where the perfume connection comes in. So, Aqua Tofana would be passed around in a perfume bottle that had St. Nicholas on the front of it. And why St. Nicholas? So St. Nicholas helped 3 prostitutes at some point, I don't know his exact story, but he helped 3 prostitutes, so he became the protector of unmarried women. So they were using these things that they called Mana di San Nicola, which, very sorry for, I can't pronounce things. And it was a very slow and inconspicuous death. So this is why they called it inheritance powder, was because they would murder you by going drop by drop over several months, and like, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, it's in this little perfume bottle, like nobody knows what was happening, and so the men would change their wills, and then the women would be happy and husband-free. Living the dream, you know? I love my husband, I just want to say that he's hopefully not watching. So, noblemen in Rome were totally freaked out about this, which, like, keep that here, you know? And honestly, we don't know that much more about her life, and there are 3 conflicting accounts of her death, and I'm just going to tell you because, like, one of them is amazing. So the first one was that she just escaped and murdered all the people, got her money, whatever, and got off scot-free. The next one was that a woman who was going to murder her husband got cold feet and told on her, and then she was thrown over the church wall. We don't like that one. Let me tell you the one that we do like. I'm a recovering Catholic, so like this speaks to my soul. I love it so much. So the other belief about what happened to Julia was that she fled to a convent, continued making Aqua Tofana, and then nuns were the ones that were passing it out. Like, can we just, I think we need a round of applause for the nuns there. Like, amazing. The last thing that I will say about it, Mozart, so if any of you saw the movie Amadeus, which at this point is kind of old 80s movie, he actually thought when he died, so mysterious death, we still don't know what happened to him, he thought he was being poisoned by Aqua Tofana, which I think is amazing. All right, last poison story for you. We're gonna go with Catherine de Medici. Now, if you didn't watch The Serpent Queen, which is incredible, and why haven't you watched it? It's amazing. She was obviously one of the Medicis, and they were this Italian noble family that were patrons of the arts. Her uncle was also the Pope, and so he arranged a marriage for her in the French royal family. So she goes to France, but the French at the time were like, we do not like Italians because you're all sorcerers, and we don't like you, Catherine de Medici, like, you're bad, we hate you. And it didn't help her case that Nostradamus was her, like, BFF. So Catherine de Medici was BFF with Nostradamus, and there was a rumor that he created a talisman for her that was made from blood of both human and goat. And because of this, she needed what was called sweet gloves, which is something that was another thing that was recurring throughout the next couple hundred years. And she had a personal perfumer, and his name was René de Florentine. And the rumors were that he was making these sweet gloves for her to mask the scent of the blood. Now, all of this was all well and dandy until one of her political rivals was killed. Modern historians believe that she just had tuberculosis, something innocuous like that. But at the time, people thought that she took these poisoned gloves and sent them to her. It was probably tuberculosis. And so, like, where do we get these ideas about, like, this woman, like, murdering her people and her rivals and whatever? It's because she was a really good ruler. She, like, took over after her husband died, like, she took over for her sons, and, like, she was actually really good. So obviously, we hate her because she was awesome. And the person who actually was the one that kind of made this narrative for her was the guy who lived like 200 years later and wrote a book that you may have heard of called The Three Musketeers. His name was Alexandre Dumas, and he wrote a book called La Reine Margot, and that was about her daughter. But in the book, he made it out that she was just murdering people left and right. Now, the other thing to know about the perfumed gloves were that, so everybody hated her, but also they were like, oh my God, I love your style, like, you just all need to copy you. So like they hated her, but they all copied her style. And so Sweet Gloves actually, they were big in Italy, but they weren't anywhere else in Europe, and she basically brought them to France and England. So Elizabeth I was another person who ended up wearing them. I'm sorry, I digress a lot. This is something you need to know about me, I'm very sorry. Last interesting note on this, Catherine de Medici's perfume is still made to this day. It is called Aqua della Regina, and it is made by Santa Novella. What is it? Santa Maria Novella, thank you. Still made. There is a store in Seattle that actually carries it, so if you want to go to sniff it, it's at Essenza and Fremont. So, all right, that's all the poison I've got for you. We're going to move on to Marie Antoinette. So, Marie Antoinette had her own personal perfumer, and his name was Jean-Louis Fargeon. And he would work with her hairdresser, whose name was Leonard Autier, as well as her dressmaker, Rose Berton, and they would just like work together to make these insane outfits and like, you know, the crazy hair and everything. All of it was scented. And he came from a middle-class background, and he also was a Republican. So he loved the Queen, but he was not a monarchist, and this comes into play in a bit. So he was first introduced to Madame de Berry, who was the mistress of Louis XV, and it's a movie that's out right now about her. And she praised his perfumes, but then the king died and she got sent away. So then Marie Antoinette's governess for her children found him and he was like, please, will you take this to the queen for me? And so he gave to the governess like scented gloves or something like that. And after that, she took him on, and he created her signature scent, which is called Parfum du Trianon, and she commissioned it because she wanted to carry the scent of the Trianon, so what I was talking about before, the Hameau, she wanted to carry it with her wherever she went. Keep that in your back pocket because we're going to get to house perfumes in a second. So after the queen got guillotined, he was in trouble because he worked for the queen. But he was able to plead his case and he got off, so yay for him, that's great. And it doesn't end there because the brand Francis Kirk Dijon, the really famous perfumer, the Baccarat Rouge guy, he recreated her perfume based on Jean-Louis Fargeon's actual notes. And it was called Soulage de la Reine, and he made it in the early 2000s. And I also wanted to tell you that Fargeon wrote a memoir called The Art of the Perfumer, or Complete Treatise on the Preparation of Perfumes. So that's something that you can read about if you want to know what Marie Antoinette's on. All right, next one. Here's a good one for Pride Month. This is Colette. So Sydney Gabrielle Colette, she was known as an olfactory novelist, and this was because her childhood home where she grew up was this amazing garden, and it just left this lasting impact on her, and she was very influenced by scent. And I'm just going to read to you something that she wrote, because it's beautiful. You might think that an invisible gardenia, feverish and white, is opening its petals in the darkness. It's the very aroma of this dew-drenched night. It's the breath from beyond the gate and the moss-covered alley of the woods where I was born, the woods which have taken me back. I belong to them again. Like, definitely olfactory novelist, love it. So she was married to this guy named Willie, which I don't know what kind of French name Willie is, but he took all the credit for her novels, and she wrote this series of novels called the Claudine novels. They were really, really popular. And she finally was able to break free, got the credit for her books, and she married a woman named Marquis du Boeuf, which I said that wrong, but he lived his life as a man. And they were both in a traveling show, and then she was like, I'm not stopping there, I'm also gonna have my own makeup and perfume line. So she made her own things, and it was called Société du Colette. And so she sold perfume, lipstick, anti-aging creams, and she also worked as a beautician. Like, how cool is that to have like this like super famous novelist like doing your face? Wonderful. The next thing with Colette, so the perfume brand Toka, they have a perfume that was inspired by Colette. It is called Colette. It's really nice. It is a very like citrus heavy summery scent. I like it a lot, but I don't wear it every day, so that is one of the things that you can swap upstairs. I brought it, so if anybody's interested in Colette perfume, there you go. The last thing I'll say about Colette is that who was the person I was having a conversation with somebody in the room. I can't see where you are now, but we were talking about how some people believe in a signature scent and some people do not. Colette was all about the signature scent. She wrote, "A woman must practice a certain self-denial by remaining faithful to a well-chosen perfume linked to your moral person, to your physical charms, a perfume your friends love and recognize, one that surprises people you meet for the first time and that makes them dream." All right, we're gonna take a turn back to house perfumes. So, Gilded Age New York, okay, very, very wealthy people. You've got the Vanderbilts, you've got the Astors. So, there was a woman named Consuelo Vanderbilt. She was beautiful, and her mother, Alva, and by the way, these people are all related to Anderson Cooper randomly. Like, again, like I digress. There you go. There's information that you now have. Consuelo was what they called a dollar princess. If you watched Downton Abbey, the mom, the American mom, she was dollar princess. So basically, these very wealthy American women would get married off to European aristocrats with titles because they needed the money to fix up their ancestral homes. And so another famous dollar princess was Jenny Churchill, and that's important because that was the cousin of the guy that Consuelo married. So Consuelo married the 9th Duke of Marlborough, and they had this insane wedding, and it was like everybody was there. It was in New York on Park Avenue, just like this beautiful thing. Right after they get married, he tells her that he has a mistress, he doesn't love her, and he married her for her money. She was very sad. She ended up being happy later in her life. She divorced him, and she married a French pilot, so yay for her. We're very happy for her. But while she was married to him, so the house that he had that needed to be fixed up was called Blenheim Palace. And there's a perfume by Penhaligon's called Blenheim Bouquet, and it's a perfume that then now King Charles and Prince William both wear, and Winston Churchill also wore that perfume. Penhaligon's is one of 2 brands that have royal warrants. It's Penhaligon's and Floris. The Queen wore Floris. And, excuse me, I bring all this up because King Charles recently also collaborated with Penhaligon's. So the Duke of Marlborough, like his perfume was over 100 years ago. That was like the early 1900s. King Charles just did the same thing with Penhaligon's for Highgrove House. And Blenheim Bouquet is more of like very traditional masculine cologne scent. It's got lemon, lavender, black pepper, and pine. And then Highgrove Bouquet, which just came out, it really does smell like an English garden, but like not very green. It's very like if you crush a petal in your hand, that's what it smells like. It's actually very pretty. It also resembles Chateau Kriegler, which I'm going to digress again. That was a perfume that Grace Kelly wore. So there you go. Let's move on to the Titanic. This is like my favorite story. So keep in mind, it's this perfume right here, so you can come smell it after if you would like. There was a man named Adolf Saalfeld, who was a German immigrant, and he worked as a chemist in England. And he got on the Titanic because he was hoping that he could make his fortune with this new perfume oil compound that he had created. Now, he survived the Titanic, which was great. However, because he was a guy, people were like, why did you live? It was supposed to be women and children. So he had a very sad life afterwards, and then like all of his family was murdered by the Nazis because that was a happy time. But anyway, these perfumes, there was a satchel that was found in the late 1990s, and they were able to recover it, bring it to the surface. They opened it up, and you could still smell this Edwardian perfume. There were like 92 vials of this perfume, and all of the researchers were like there's a video of it you can watch where people are like crying and everything because it had such an impactful feeling for them. And so they did analysis of the vials and they found out what was in them. And so QVC, of all things, made Legacy Titanic 1912. So it actually smells nice, like it's kind of soapy, and it smells like Kelka Floor, which I know I'm saying that wrong, by Ubi Gone, which was the perfume worn by Princess Diana on her wedding day. Don't you guys love me? You're just like, wow, all this like random knowledge you're dropping. Yeah, you don't even have to take me, it's cool. So anyway, what's interesting about all of that was that in the Victorian times, people pretty much just wore like flower essences. So when Houbigant and Guerlain and all of those brands started making perfumes in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was a big change. And so that's why Chanel No. 5 was so popular, was because it was this totally different thing that was more complicated than what people had been used to. All right, so that's Titanic perfume. Please feel free to come sniff that. Now we're going to talk about Chanel versus Scaparelli. Now, if you did not know this, I'm very sorry to break it to you, but Chanel was a Nazi, and Scaparelli was not. They had basically kind of opposite lives. So Chanel was an orphan who had to, kind of work for everything that she had. Scaparelli was a noble Italian girl who, oh my gosh, she's so funny. She wrote an erotic book of poetry when she was like 12 years old, and her parents found it and they sent her to boarding school. And so she was like, I hate this, I'm gonna go on a hunger strike until you let me come home. So they did. But then she like married a psychic and went to England. It was the whole thing. Now, the other interesting thing, actually, I made a note of this. Her father was like a famous astronomer, and her father's cousin discovered the tomb of Nefertari. Like, so random. But so back to Scaparelli and Chanel. So obviously they were both very famous designers, and hated each other, like super hated each other. And Chanel called Scaparelli that Italian artist who makes clothes, and Scap, she liked to be called Scap, called Chanel the hat maker, because that was how Chanel got her start. Now, the two of them mostly just talked shit about each other. There wasn't like anything big except for this one story. So, right before Paris fell to the Nazis, they were at a party, and Chanel went up to Scaparelli and was like, I dare you to dance with me. And Chanel, it was like a costume party, and Chanel went dressed as herself, which is like the most Chanel thing I've ever heard. Scaparelli, because she was like friends with Salvador Dali and Jean Cocteau and all these like surrealist artists, she was dressed as like a surrealist Christmas tree, because that was just the type of person she was. And so they danced, and then Chanel danced Scaparelli into a chandelier and set her on fire. And the party guests were like, oh, this is so delightful. And they had, because they thought it was like a planned thing, and so they had club soda that they were like trying to put the fire out with, which is so funny. But getting back to like what this has to do with perfume was that, like Chanel, Scaparelli also started perfume, and it was mostly to be for her clients when they came in to dress. So it was like this special thing that you couldn't necessarily buy. I really like Scaparelli's perfume bottles, so I have like a collection of them. You can come see, just be very careful because obviously they're very old. Shocking was the most famous one that she ever created. Most of her other ones didn't really get a lot of traction, but they're so interesting. So for Shocking, this was based on the dressmaker dummy that Mae West, that she used for Mae West because she dressed her for Hollywood premieres and all that stuff. The flowers that you see up top, those were crafted by Salvador Dali because they were like really good friends. So love that. There's also the best bottle ever. I don't have because it like goes for like thousands of dollars. But she and Dali had a lot that they did together, including sleeping. So this was a perfume that you were supposed to wear to bed, and it came with this little So, there you go. Scaparelli. I also have, this is also shocking, but it's a solid perfume, and she was known for what she called shocking pink, so that's why all of these have pink. It was named for her. But yeah, love it. So moving on to Zelda Fitzgerald. Zelda Fitzgerald liked Scaparelli. This was the perfume that she wore, also by Scaparelli. This one is called Salute. There is a letter from Zelda Fitzgerald to F. Scott Fitzgerald in 1938 after he put her in a mental institution, which I think was wrong, and she should not have been there, and I hate him. But she asked for this perfume because she just loved it. She was also an it girl, so she definitely had Shalimar, she definitely had Chanel No. 5, all of these different perfumes. But what's very interesting about this one is that Scaparelli was very into more unisex scents. So you'll find that this is a very like sporty unisex thing. This bottle is from the 1930s, but it's still very strong. You can totally smell it if you want. Just be very careful. So the paint on this is coming off. So just please be careful and don't break my trinkets because I'm a goblin and I love my trinkets. All right, let's see. Okay, let's talk. I'm almost done. I talk a lot. I'm sorry.
We love it. We love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I haven't been paying attention to TikTok. If anybody is watching on TikTok, hello. Thank you. We're going to talk about Andy Warhol now. So Andy Warhol loved perfumes. Like, he was crazy about perfumes. And he liked to switch his perfumes. He was not a signature scent boy. He was like, I gotta change things based on my mood and because I want to have memories associated with a certain perfume. And the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh actually has a lot of his perfume bottles, and if you go to their website, you can search for them and you can see all of his perfume bottles, which is really cool. So some of the notable ones are Chanel No. 5, Estee Lauder Youth Dew, Guerlain Abbey Rouge, which somebody said they had it. Yes, he has it, so go smell it, because that one's amazing. And he also had Yves Saint Laurent Opium. And so Andy Warhol preferred perfumes that were ambery, that had floral and spicy notes. And before he became like his artist self, he did commercial art for Chanel. So he actually has a lot of pieces that you can see that are of Chanel bottles and other perfume bottles, which is really cool. But that is not the awesome story that I'm about to tell you. So, when he died, one of the editors at Interview magazine threw into his grave Estee Lauder Beautiful. And the reason why they did that was because Andy wanted to try it and he never got to in life. So Andy Warhol is buried with Estee Lauder Youth Dew. All right, I've got two more stories for you, and they're both historical but recent. So Jude Law is currently in a movie called Firebrand, which is about Henry VIII. Now, traditionally, Henry VIII has been depicted as this like horrible tyrant, but in the last 20 years, they like sexed him up. They like made him Jonathan Rhys Meyers and everything. But now we're going back to him being a jerk. And so Jude Law, it turns out, actually works with a perfumer to make scents based on his characters. And he had one based on Henry VIII in his later life. So this is grotesque Henry. This is when he's like, he's morbidly obese. He has an ulcer on his leg that is constantly leaking pus. Like, it's just disgusting. Would you like to know what's in this perfume that Jude Law has been wearing on set? Thank you. It has notes of blood, fecal matter, and sweat. And he was just dousing himself in this perfume on set, and other co-stars were like, why? But yeah, so how can you make those kind of scents? Like, blood is usually something metallic. For the fecal matter thing, you could use civet. You could also use indole, which is like a component of jasmine. It's like that rotting, like dead flower scent. It sounds bad, but it actually smells really good. I feel like all these together are probably not good. Like, you don't want to hang out with Jude Law right now. Okay, I'll end with this story. So this was just announced last week. in 2019, in a cave in Spain, which many millennia ago was part of the Roman Empire, they found an intact quartz vessel inside of an urn, and they did analysis on it, and they found, would you like to know what ancient robes smelled like? It was patchouli, yes, you got it in the back. The ancient Romans were wearing patchouli, which I like the scent of patchouli on other people, but on me, it's disgusting. So I would not have had a good time in ancient Rome. But the reason why I tell you all of these stories is because, for me anyway, I got interested in perfume history, and then I went down all these rabbit holes, and I was like, history is awesome. But yeah, it's just this living, breathing thing, and it is an art form, and it is something that can connect us to the past, as we saw with Jude. So that's all I got for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen.
If you want to go deeper into any of the stories that I talked about, all of my videos are on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, just at Immortal Perfumes. All of the stories are like much longer. Again, you can smell these, just be very careful. Do not open this one because it will break. Just be very careful. And then the last thing I will mention is that I'm actually leading a perfume history trip to Paris in May 2024. And so if that's something that you are interested in, definitely sign up on my website. So thank you all.
Hey, don't go anywhere, Jen. This is the Q&A portion now. Who's got questions for Jen? I can't see, so if anyone's got their hands up, tell them. I see that.
Hey Jen, I'm really curious. What is your favorite scent profile?
Ooh. Okay, so right now I have a perfume called Carmilla, and it's like sexy lesbian vampire. So
We love to hear it.
Yeah, that's my preferred scent profile. I like very dark, very resinous, very smoky.
Anyone else? You're right here.
Alright, I was actually just kind of wondering, because I was reading a little bit like a couple months ago about perfumes that the Romanovs wore, because I, like many people when they were about 11 years old, got really into reading about the Romanovs. It's like something about like, just something about like dead princesses in 1918 just sounds really romantic to me. And I seem to recall that like most of them were Coty girls, so they wore perfume by the brand Coty, and each one had a different flower. And I was reading on the website for Eretz Elegant that allegedly Tsar Nicholas was wearing Violet's Desire, which I might be butchering it, but it was like the violet scent for men. I was wondering if you had anything like disputing or in favor of that, but also any thoughts basically on Romanovs and perfume.
Yeah. So I have a video on that actually, too. I don't know what Nicholas wore, so I'm sorry I can't help you there, but I can confirm for you that the Grand Duchesses wore Coty perfumes. Violet, the one that starts with a J that means rose, like Jacqueline. Yeah, that's it. Forget the other one, but there are pictures of their perfume bottles. And the Tsarina, Alexandra, she wore Atkinson's White Rose, and this is actually a really good one because it's actually really hard to find a lot of these sources, but we have a first-hand source from that. It was her, I forget if it was like her maid or who it was, but it was somebody that was working with the family, and she wrote a memoir, and you can find it on Project Gutenberg, and it says the names of their perfumes, and you can also see pictures.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, there's a hand over here. Keep it up, I'm blind.
Okay, this is kind of a not really funny question, but what is like a scent memory that you have or a scent that makes you feel safe?
Okay, sorry to make things sad for a second. So my
Sorry,
dad.
that was my bad.
my dad died in 2010, really horrible time for me. Probably like even worse than cancer actually. Like I can tell you it sucked. I was very sad, but my dad wore Stetson, which is like a very like 1960s, 1970s cologne. And after he died, I bought a bottle of it and I keep it in my drawer. And it is wonderful because enough time has passed that it is now a happy memory and not like bawling all the time. So yeah, thank you for asking.
I have another question right here.
Is there a house or a perfumer that you would point to as maybe the most important, just even in the last 100 years, but just like, is there a milestone or just something that changed everything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's pretty subjective, but I can give you a couple names. So Ubigant was the one that first had the more intricate aldehyde concoction, and then Guerlain was just a couple years behind them, and then obviously Chanel. But Coty, like all of the brands that we've been talking about, all of them were big names, but what's really interesting, like for me and for Barbara, is that in the last, especially like the last 20 years, like people have been very interested in moving away from the big brands, and I feel like it's the gold rush right now of interesting perfumes that you can't get everywhere. So I hope that answered your question. Hi.
I want to know what you hate. Tell me what you like absolutely cannot stand. The opposite of all of those others.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I used to be okay with patchouli, but now it is just disgusting. Like I was up there smelling Angel. It smells like armpits. Like it's disgusting. I also like. So when I first like got on TikTok, I was like, oh, all the perfume girlies, they're like Baccarat Rouge, and so like I got it. I hate it. It's kind of Stop. I'm sorry.
Talk that shit.
Someone with this guy.
Any other questions from anybody else in the crowd? Make a noise, because I really actually can't see anything. Yep, okay, perfect.
All right, thank you everybody.
Thank you.